Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show in which I, Matt the Game Boy, will take you through the highs and lows of the Game Boy library, one cart at a time. This week we will be looking at a little game from Jellico. It's called Maru's Mission. When you think of the name Jellico, you'll be forgiven if the first series that pops into your mind is Ninja Jaja Maru-kun. While this little red ninja's exploits spanned home consoles, arcades, and of course portable systems, we in the West saw very little in the way of releases. The series had JRPGs, arcade-style and traditional platformers. Hell, Jellico even tried to take on The Legend of Zelda with its fourth entry on the Famicom. But while NES players never got any of the Maru titles, American Game Boy owners retreated to the only two entries in the series to get an official English translation, namely Ninja Taro, a port of the Famicom Zelda clone we've already discussed, and Maru's Mission. While the box art may have changed from this lovely piece to one that is very clearly the base definition of bad American box art, perhaps the most interesting thing about Maru's Mission compared to the Japanese release of the game called Oira Jajamaru Sekai Daiboken is that the game was heavily changed for the American market. Oh no, I hear you cry, get the banners! Those buggers at Jellico censored a video game. Well, yes and no. Quite clear is the removal of swastikas, crosses, and Satan, as you would expect from any game published on a Nintendo console in the early 90s. But for no explicable reason, the game's opening, Maru's frog, and the music undergo changes too. The forest in ancient Japan becomes an American city, the frog becomes a turtle, and, well, the music simply gets changed around to different levels. But it doesn't end there! Oh no, dear viewer. Most of the Japanese game's sprites are also replaced in the American release. But before you get your torches and pitchforks, I would argue it's actually for the better in this case. Instead of every other boss being a clunky humanoid character, Jellico tweaked their sprites not only to reflect mythical beings in Western instead of Japanese mythologies, but generally upped the quality of the enemies to reflect the cartoony, chunky sprite style you'd expect from most Jellico games. Not only this, but some of the mechanics are adjusted to make the game a little bit more fun to play, and the boss fights a little more interesting. But at their heart, both games follow the same story. While out with his girlfriend Corey, Maru's love is abducted by a monster, and he sets off on a globe-spanning adventure to find her. While visiting the game's 6 locations, Romania, Greece, Japan, the US, Brazil, and Egypt, Maru beats down some mythical creatures for information on his lost love. To do this, Maru finds himself side-scrolling through the game's 6 levels, using B to throw shuriken and A to jump. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, you'd be surprised some of the little quirks even such a basic premise can employ. First off, Maru's jump height is determined by how long the player holds down the jump button, meaning you can fly right to the top of the screen if you want to. But it must be noted you can't simply flap your bird around the levels, as by hitting A to go up, as soon as it released, you will immediately come down. On certain stages, pressing A will also see you sticking to the roofs and being able to run along the ceiling, which is a nice touch that, in my opinion, they don't do enough with. Attacking enemies is a lot more straightforward than the jump mechanics, however. By pressing B and aiming left, right, up or down, Maru can throw shuriken that can easily dispatch enemies. By killing them with shuriken, Maru gets access to some crazy power-ups, including a train car to ride in, a bomb, and a whip made out of his own sprites, which looks and handles pretty oddly. Halfway through a level, you'll run into a mini-boss that, again, looks better than both sprites and its portrait than in the Japanese version, who will generally reward you with a weapon to beat the big boss at the end of the level. This usually takes the form of a throwing weapon you can only use on the boss fight by pressing select the one time. But in the American version, for at least Medusa, grants the player a shield that they can use to reflect her attacks back at her and probably makes it the most interesting fight in the game. Whether you defeat an enemy or a boss in Maru's Mission, their souls will slowly float up to the top of the screen after their deaths, and you can collect them to gain health. A strange choice for a pickup, perhaps, but one that was established as a bonus item in Jajamaru games on the Famicom, and, in all fairness, if you really think about it, is not really any more savage than eating an enemy's heart like you do in most other games of this ilk. You're fair to think that every enemy giving you health is a little overgenerous, but it comes at a cost. You see, Maru's mission doesn't have any lives in the game, meaning you're going to need to build up a good stock of hit points just in case a boss fight goes sour. There are a lot of bosses who rely on cheap area effect or heat-seeking attacks that can take you out pretty easily if you're not packing enough health, which, unfortunately, at least for me, leads to you playing Maru's mission a little more cautiously than perhaps the developers intended. But make no bones about it, in spite of the edits and graphical improvements, Maru's mission is certainly a lot easier in the West than in its homeland of Japan. While falling down a pit in the US version will simply restart the level, it's an insta-death in the Japanese version of the game, making you start the whole thing again. Similarly, health is more frugally distributed as neither the main bosses or mini-bosses give the player any souls. The real cherry on top, however, is that the Japanese version's Satan-like end boss actually has two forms. One you can see, and one that's invisible. Yep, you generally find out his position by either a wall of arrows to the face, or by the cheeky monkey getting right up on top of you and killing you dead. So, with these regional differences out of the way, I know what you all are thinking. You just want to know, is either version any good, Matt? I can't lie. In spite of how much I do genuinely quite enjoy certain aspects of this game, namely the music, the artwork, and the crazy little "we're going to Romania" bonus sections between travel locations, where, for no explicable reason, you find yourself underwater shooting sharks with a harpoon gun. But as much as I like these things, at its core, what's on offer in Maru's mission feels a little bit flat, even for an early Game Boy title. The jump mechanics, despite initially seeming kinda cool, is the very definition of floaty, making the game's many spiked ceilings an issue that slows down the gameplay in the later half of the game's 6 levels. While the bosses look fun, like most B-grade games of the era, aren't too much of a challenge to the player. By using those well-trained thumbs to mash the B button, most gamers will simply be able to walk their way through these encounters unscathed. When this isn't the case on bosses like Dracula and Level 3's Golem, the developers' attempts to mix it up feel more tedious than challenging, which is a shame. Throw in the odd health system I've already mentioned, and how the game's difficulty ramp will force you to slow right down to a screen-clearing crawl because of it, and I think it's safe to say that Maru's mission, by today's standards, is a distinctly average game. The biggest disappointment with it, however, is in the game's English translation. The game is naturally filled with the kind of pre- and post-enemy banter you'd expect in 90s video game writing, so no surprises there. But by getting to the end and defeating the evil Muramasa to save Cory, the end boss will accuse the player of cheating and offer them a fair fight by writing away to Jellico's US main office. But why? My mind was reeling. Is there any Kirby-style hard mode hidden away here that nobody's discovered? Did they hold some kind of Jellico World Championship on this game? Or did they simply give you some kind of Ninja-kun statue? Well, after doing a little digging, it turns out that the only person I can find that claims to have written to Muramasa was in the comments of a blog post from 2012, and they claimed sadly that it was a bust. All Jellico did was send back a generic thank you for your interest in our project style letter, and that plain sucks. If you can get Maru's mission for cheap, and you should be able to, because this game is pretty common, then give it a go. It's not going to set your world on fire the way most Game Boy games would, but it's certainly better than at least half of the licensed games that graced the Game Boy's green screen around the same time. If you're super curious though, there's always a 3DS eShop version of the game. But I will say, if you can live with the dodgy sprite work and having to guess through several Japanese riddles from the Sphinx boss, at least the higher level of challenge on offer in the Japanese version of the game might make this creep from a generally forgettable experience to something more appealing for the hardcore gamer. And that brings us to the end of another Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of Maru's mission. Until next week, gamers, it's goodbye from me. Game on.